Hello and welcome back to NoBS. Today we finally turn to talking about the Netflix drama series called 13 Reasons Why. This series has become rather infamous online for being one of the worst shows Netflix has ever made, possibly one of the worst shows being made currently. They recently came out with their fourth season, and right now we're going to go back and backtrack a little bit and start talking about season one. Now, this is a little bit dated. I didn't get to the show originally. I actually wouldn't have normally watched this, but I had some friends recommend it to me, specifically Sean, the actual Justice Warrior, friend of the show, been on here many times, and he was telling me about how crazy it was. And I have to say, he was certainly right. This was worth the time and the effort, and that's why we're talking about it today. I want to go over all the SJW social justice warrior moments, and also I want to talk about how this ties into the present, because there are a lot of things that are relative to what's going on in the world today. Specifically, a lot of these streaming services and these places that are sharing movies and media online, they've been coming under great scrutiny due to controversies in current year. A lot of stuff has become racialized and become offensive in the present. So what they're asking these companies to do is put warning labels on stuff, and also sometimes they even cut stuff out and re-edit things and remake them so that they're more PC and politically correct in the present. We're of course totally against this, and I think it's rather silly, but I find it rather interesting that 13 Reasons Why is one of the shows and one of the parts of Netflix that has been doing this all along. This show originally came out around 2017, and they started off right off the bat with a big warning right before you watch the show. And this is because of the premise, which we'll get to soon. But basically, there's some controversial things in the show that they feel the need to put a warning label on saying, hey, if this might trigger you, if this might upset you, be careful, watch it with a friend, or maybe not watch it at all if you're too sensitive. Now, that seems like the nice thing to do, but at the same time, I find it kind of contradictory, because it's like Netflix tries to be PC and all SJW all the time, but then they put this warning label on and make this really ridiculous show that goes in the total wrong direction. I mean, this thing glorifies a lot of bad things, including self-harm. And I think that's the biggest gripe a lot of people have with this show. But before we get too far into that, into the specifics, I also want to talk about how they've cut things out of the show. We talked about there's a one death scene in the show that got cut out last year because it was deemed just too much graphic violence in it, so they had to cut it out. And that's another thing that reminds me about the present, because Netflix has come under fire a number of times recently for cutting stuff out and being a little politically correct. And the fact that this show has been right in the middle of it, I think it relates to the present, and it has a lot to do with what's going on now, because they're cutting stuff left and right on Netflix. They're talking about taking down movies. Things like Tropic Thunder, Forrest Gump, Indiana Jones are all offensive now. And I think that's the last thing before we get to the premise. I find it funny that 13 Reasons Why remains on their network, because it's like this thing is really offensive. It glorifies self-harm in a lot of ways. And I think that is rather questionable. So the fact that this thing stays on their catalog and it stays on, I'm not asking it to get canceled. I don't want anything to get canceled, but I just find it interesting that all these other things are, but 13 Reasons Why remains. So with all that said, let's jump into the premise. I'm going to talk about a lot of parts of this show. I'm going to talk about the story a little bit. I'm going to talk about different parts that I found very SJW influenced, very left-leaning. This is a very progressive kind of show. And so it's got a lot of frustrating things in it, but also it's kind of fun to watch. I'll admit it hooked me in because it has this kind of mystery plot that gets you interested. But at the same time, it's more like watching like a crappy soap opera. Like you kind of want to watch it to see what happens because it's so crazy. But at the same time, the acting can be really bad. It can be really cringy and over the top too. So without further ado, let's get to the reasons why here. So why is it called 13 Reasons Why? Let's go to this article. It talks about the show. It's on Wikipedia. It says 13 Reasons Why is an American teen drama web television series originally developed for Netflix as a limited series by Brian Yorkey. The series revolves around high school student Clay Jensen and the aftermath of Hannah Baker's suicide, leaving behind a box of cassette tapes in which she details why she chose to end her life. So that's the basic premise. And from there, you kind of talk about Clay. You follow Clay Jensen. He listens to all these tapes. There's 13 tapes and 13 episodes to this first season. And right out the gate, what you can tell is this self-harm premise. It's all about this Hannah Baker girl taking herself out, taking her life. And what I really found the most disturbing in the beginning was the fact that it kind of glorifies the whole thing. She glorifies this self harm, this taking of her life, and it turns into this whole season of a show. She makes 13 cassette tapes that Clay listens to each episode, which admittedly, like that's a fine premise. Like kind of enjoyed the way they set it up and the way they kind of played it out. It wasn't the worst. I like a good mystery, but then at the same time, it was overly dramatic and it also just kind of seemed like it dragged on too long. And specifically, there was one character that really frustrated me, especially in the first season, and that was Tony. Tony is kind of like the friend character, the best friend of Clay. I don't know if they're necessarily best friends at the beginning. They kind of just start to become friends throughout the season. But the point is, Tony knows everything that's going on. Actually, everyone has listened to the tapes besides Clay, and you find out that they're all just keeping it a secret from him, which is really strange. And you just know in the real world, they would just kind of say, hey, no, you don't have to listen to it. This happened, boom, it would be over with. But that wouldn't make a good TV show. I admit that. But it is really frustrating when Tony is just so mysterious the whole time. And he's always saying, you got to listen to the tapes. I can't tell you that. He's always like holding back. And it just gets really frustrating because it happens almost every episode, and it gets like to the point where you're like, just tell him what happens. Like, can we just hear it? Like, you're just so over the whole thing. And that kind of brings you to the next point. And the next thing where that gets a little interesting is, yeah, like I was saying, it glorifies the self-harm. It makes kind of Hannah out to be the victim, even though she's the one that took her own life. And you kind of talk about that, and they try to justify that. Each tape gives a story, and Hannah tells her story on a tape. There's this friend who wronged her this way. There's this person who dumped her. This and this happens. And it just kind of goes through, and you kind of like are thinking, hey, what's going on, Netflix? Like, what kind of message are you trying to send? Because I think a lot of people might watch this and think, hey, I could make some tapes and have a cool sort of end to my life too. Everyone's going to talk about me while I'm gone. They're going to make this whole show about me. And that's like the main thing that really troubles me in this first season. A lot changes in the other seasons, and if this video goes well, we can do more episodes. Like I might have to do a part 2 of season 1, and then we could do season 2, 3, and 4 too if we get to it over time. I'm still watching through all the episodes, but the point is, here in season 1, the first thing and the biggest problem is the glorifying of the self-harm, and then we get to Tony being too kind of mysterious and over the top. And that's kind of the basic premise. Next, we'll talk about other things in the show, other kinds of SJW moments. Like this show is very, very influenced by like liberal politics and stuff. For starters, it doesn't really outright state it for a while, but it takes place in a California town. It takes place in this kind of regular kind of suburb of California. It has a good mix of people. So it kind of explains the diversity there. But still at the same time, when I watch something like this, it reminds me of like Spider-Man Homecoming, where it's just really obnoxiously diverse. Like you just see every single kind of minority, and there's a few white people in it. Like the main character is white and then the villain's white, but like that's it. And then everyone else is like black, brown. There's a lot of gay people. There's a lot of this people, like alphabet. Like it's really, really over the top with the diversity, which again, isn't something like that really kills me. Like I don't hate diversity. I have no problem with spreading around and hiring all these different people, but there is a little biasness to it. There is a little kind of hint at where it's like being white is bad. Like the bad characters are all white. The main villain is a white guy. His name's Bryce. The main characters are white too, like Clay and Hannah. But I think with Hannah, with the girl that takes her life, like she's white, and it's kind of like the point is she's flawed and a broken character. So I don't think they would make that a minority. Like since she takes her life, they kind of give the minorities the better parts. Like they're all like kind of unstoppable badasses, like how Tony is kind of the badass character too. He's got a big cool car. He got into a few fights and stuff like that, but he's generally viewed as a good character. And that's why I think he's not only a minority. That also brings up another point. Like Tony is also a gay character, and there's a lot of gay characters in this show, which I think was like one of the other things that kind of raised an eyebrow. Like, not that there's anything wrong with them. Like, of course, we have nothing wrong with diversity or alphabet people, nothing, no problems there. But if you're trying to depict a high school in America, you can't have half the characters be gay or lesbian. It just doesn't make sense. Like, it's just not the right ratio. I mean, we're talking about a group that's like 1 out of 10, maybe at the most. Like, there's not as many gay people as are represented here, but in 13 Reasons Why, it's like half the cast is gay. Tony's gay. He's got a boyfriend. We get to see them gay kiss all the time. And then there's another character who ends up being gay. This one ends up gay. Even the main character ends up having like a little bit of a girlfriend at one point in one scene. And there's another lesbian character. So that is really over the top and a bit too much. And then there's the whole thing about minorities. We talked about the fact that the whites are bad, minorities are good. And finally, we already went over that death scene that got altered. And I think that's an interesting place to end, at least for this first part of this video. I think we could dive into things a little bit more, maybe talk about season 1 more detailed, or talk about season 2 next, because season 2 and 3, I've kind of gotten into that. And season 2 just kind of re-goes over this whole season 1. But by 3, I'm in the middle of 3, and they also do a lot of dumb stuff there. Like basically what happened was there was only enough book material. This is based on a book, and it was only enough for the first season. So we kind of have like a Game of Thrones situation. Like Game of Thrones had that problem where eventually they expressed and portrayed all the books, and then they had to write their own stuff. And that's when the Game of Thrones TV show on HBO totally went off the rails. And the same thing seems to be happening with 13 Reasons Why. Like they had enough book material for the first season, and then they just kind of lose it and they try to keep going. They do 3 more seasons, and from there, they don't just deal with self-harm anymore. And this first season has a few other themes, but that's the main one. But later on, they go all out and they talk about every kind of issue. It kind of like is like them throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, because they address like every issue. They address like, Second Amendment stuff. They address other stuff like, violence, bad parents, sexual abuse, drugs, all kinds of stuff like that. It goes all out later on. So we'll have a lot more to talk about later. But for now, that about wraps things up. That about is all I have to say about the first season. The SJW moments I have like right off the top of my head, right off the beginning of seeing it the first time. And the last thing I'll say before we go is I'm just really curious, like, why is this okay? That's what I want to know. Like, why is this glorification of self-harm okay? Because the whole season, it just seems like everyone loves Hannah. Everyone's talking about her the whole time. They're just like hyping her up like this superhero because she took her life. And it just seems like the way she does it, it's just so much of a glorification. It's like the real wrong way to portray this. Like if you're trying to like kind of send a message to, which they obviously are, and they're trying to be this kind of woke show, which is another reason that it's kind of frustrating. And it just makes you think, you're just like, why would they do this so hard and make Hannah be so sympathetic? And I understand, like, you want to feel bad for someone, they hurt themselves. And I'm not saying, we should be hating on her, but I think there should have been like a negative kind of connotation, at least some kind of implication that Hannah was wrong. She shouldn't have ended her life. Like, we should all want to live and not be glorifying this stuff. And then on top of that, coming back around to the stuff going on in current year, like the stuff in the present, trying to take down a lot of things on Netflix. They're taking down and re-editing Back to the Future. They're doing this warning label on Gone with the Wind. It just makes me think, like, how is this okay? Why is 13 Reasons Why still going? Why did they get 4 seasons? They just had a new one. And the fact that this is like glorifying this stuff and it's aimed at kids and it's trying to make this whole story, and it's very, very edgy and very, questionable in my opinion. And I think the fact that they have to hinge on that so hard too, it just goes to show it's kind of lazy writing. Like the leftists have to go off of these kinds of tragedies and this kind of like high school drama. And it's an interesting show, but it definitely has its questionable moments. That about wraps things up. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Tell me what you think about 13 Reasons Why and all these SJW moments below. Also, make sure you hit the like button if you want more videos like this, if you want us to continue covering this show, because believe me, this is only the beginning. We're just scratching the surface. So hit that like button. If we get, say, 2,000 likes, I'll keep this series going. We'll keep talking about this show. And in addition, comment your thoughts on it below. Like, what else do you want us to cover? Like, say, talk about this, talk about that, talk about this character. Comment it below. I'm going to go through all these comments very, very specifically this time and try to address everything you talk about in the next video. So hit the like button, 2,000 likes, we'll get more going, and we'll also be reading those comments real soon. Thanks for your time today, guys. Make sure you have a great day, and until next time, I'll see you on the other side. Hey guys, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about our new second channel. NoBS News has been really ramping up recently. We've got over 10,000 subscribers now, and it's growing each and every day. This is a new extra channel where I can give you guys more content, which includes extra videos, sometimes streams, sometimes other fun things too, clip shows, whatever you like. NoBS News is going to have it there for you. So make sure you check it out by either searching NoBS News on YouTube or clicking the link below this video. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.